Thank you. Now I recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for being here. Obviously, very important subject. Ms. King, I was struck earlier in your testimony by your concern of safety and some of the figures that you cited about the number of fatalities having gone up, and I couldn't help but think to myself about what has changed. And one of the things that I know, and full disclosure, I am adamantly opposed to the recreational use of marijuana, and particularly those states that allow that. And impaired driving is something that is of concern to me. And being on the health subcommittee and being currently the only pharmacist serving in Congress, the opioid epidemic is something that I've worked diligently on. And I'm wondering, what role does NHTSA have in any of this? Is there anything that the agency can do to help in this fight?
Very much so, and we've been very active since I took office at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. First, we launched a campaign demonstrating federal leadership in educating the public that driving impaired by any substance, whether it be marijuana, opioids, pharmaceuticals, or illicit drugs, is dangerous. We have also increased our support for local state programs, offices of traffic safety grant monies, support for law enforcement whose activities to identify impaired drivers and remove them from the roads. We support prosecutors who help make sure that if there's a repeat offender, an impaired driver, that they have the tools, they're educated and have the tools to make sure that driver is directed appropriately in court. So we have been supporting not only public education, but the system at the state and local level that can remove those dangerous drivers from our road. I believe it starts with public education because the market research has shown us again and again that marijuana users in particular think they drive better when they're high, and yet when they are in a test simulator, the evidence shows they're impaired. They're not driving better. They're slower to decide. They make bad decisions, and their reaction time is slowed.
Absolutely. I can't believe anyone would assert anything to the contrary. Nevertheless, is there any technology? Now, you know, you get to alcohol and you've got the breathalyzers and you've got, you know, we can lock the steering wheels and anything. Is there anything in technology-wise that can help us with something like that?
There are numerous
specifically to marijuana and the opioid use and impaired driving.
Of course, blood tests can show the evidence.
But you can't take a blood test before you crank a vehicle every time.
Oh, I understand. So there's not something that's related to actually stopping operation of a vehicle. There are roadside tools being developed. There's something oral fluid testing where something like a swab can test for active THC or other marijuana constituents. And we should be issuing a report soon that discusses some of those technologies.
But nothing technology, no kind of technology on the car itself that NHTSA might be able to say, you're going to have to do this or do that.
Not yet. We have for alcohol, we have supported innovations that can detect alcohol in the presence of breath, and that can be related to whether or not the vehicle can be operated, but that has not been developed for marijuana, not yet.
Well, and I do thank you for your efforts on that because it's something that's very important. It should be very important to all of us, and certainly something that's very important to me. Mr. Weaver, I'd like to ask you very quickly. It looks like, from what I understand, the proposed safe rule that should be finalized sometime soon freezes the targets at the model year 2020 levels, and I understand that, but yet we're still going to, from what I've gathered hearing here, that by 2026, because of certain elements, if you will, certain changes, that we're still going to be able to achieve the decrease in emissions that was proposed by the previous administration. How is that? How can we possibly do that?
Well, part of what we're trying to do with the rule is make it cleaner and simpler. And I'll give an example of something that affects the standards on paper, versus what they do in real life, which is for every electric vehicle sold, it counts as more than one vehicle for compliance purposes. And that doesn't produce any additional emissions reduction. That's purely an accounting exercise for purposes of trying to promote the development of electric vehicles. So that's one example of where you look at the paper and it looks like, the current standards are considerably more stringent than the alternatives we've proposed, but when you take into account the practical reality, it's not so much.
Well, good. Well, again, I want to thank both of you for doing this. I'm one who believes that this is what we should be doing when we come to policies and particular legislation. I've never seen a perfect piece of legislation. It has to be tweaked. It has to be massaged over time, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here, and I applaud your efforts, and thank you, and I yield back.